It wasn't the kind of silence you'd expect at a charity event filled with reporters, kids, and the hum of barbecue grills in the background. But when the little girl tugged at Patrick Mahomes's wrist and murmured, "I haven't eaten all day," the noise seemed to evaporate around him. Patrick had been signing autographs under a pop-up tent, flanked by 2 volunteers and a local news crew. His usual smile, the same one that lit up stadiums and press rooms, faltered, not out of confusion, out of something sharper, something that twisted in his chest. The girl was no older than 7. Her hair was pulled into 2 uneven braids. Her sneakers were too small, and her t-shirt bore a faded cartoon character. She hadn't come with a camera. She hadn't come to meet a celebrity. She had come, it seemed, with a kind of quiet urgency most kids her age shouldn't carry. He crouched beside her, lowering his frame so their eyes met. "What's your name?" "Amira." Her voice cracked on the second syllable. She didn't look up when she said it. Her eyes were fixed on the corner of the table where a box of untouched sandwiches sat. Patrick glanced toward the volunteers. No one had noticed yet. They were busy posing for a group photo. For a few seconds, it was just the 2 of them in a crowded field that had somehow vanished into stillness. He didn't ask where her parents were. Not yet. Instead, he asked something else, something that wasn't rehearsed or polished or approved by a PR team. "When was the last time you ate?" Amira hesitated. "Yesterday, at school." It hit him like a blow to the ribs. Not because he hadn't heard stories like this before, he had, but because it was here, in front of him, not on a screen or through someone else's foundation report. A real child, a real stomach, real hunger. He stood up abruptly and reached for the sandwich box, without asking, without permission. He unwrapped 2, ham and cheese, and handed them to Amira. She blinked twice, almost like she didn't understand the gesture, and then, very slowly, took the sandwiches in both hands and held them to her chest, like they were something, more than food. The news camera, repositioning for better lighting, swung back in their direction. A photographer lowered his lens, as if unsure whether to capture the moment, and then someone clapped, one of the parents nearby maybe, or a volunteer. Patrick turned, expression unreadable. "Is this what we call a charity event?" The voice wasn't angry. It was quiet, but it cut through the crowd like a blade. People began to shift uncomfortably. One of the organizers approached, whispering something about logistics, about schedule, about moving to the next booth. Patrick didn't move. "She told me she hasn't eaten since yesterday," he said aloud. "And I'm standing here under a tent with food we're not even serving." There was no applause now, just silence, and the faint sound of Amira chewing, slowly, at his side. "I'll stay," he added, "but not for photos." He knelt beside Amira again, this time to help her open the juice bottle one of the vendors handed over. Her hands were trembling. "What's your mum's name?" he asked, gently. "Kayla. Is she here?" Amira shook her head. He looked up, catching the eye of a woman watching from a few feet away, early 30s, skin drawn, arms crossed tightly over her chest. She wasn't dressed like the others. No team colors, no phone out for selfies. Just eyes that had seen too much, and a posture that said she didn't want to be noticed. Patrick walked over. "Are you her mum?" She nodded once. "Yeah. I didn't mean for her to say anything, I just—" She trailed off. "She was hungry. I told her to wait." Patrick didn't ask why. He already knew. Rent, gas, groceries, choices no one should have to make in a city with million-dollar stadiums. He extended his hand. "I'm Patrick. I know who you are." "You working right now?" Kayla hesitated. "Just got laid. Off last month. Been doing what I can." He didn't press. "Can I help?" Her defenses went up immediately. "I don't need a handout." "This isn't that," he said calmly. "It's a response." She studied him for a moment, then slowly her eyes softened. We're staying at the shelter off Troost. He nodded. I know where that is. What followed wasn't dramatic. No speeches, no announcements. Patrick left his table, walked with Kayla and Amira to his truck parked behind the stage area, and handed them a grocery bag already packed with food from an earlier drop-off he'd planned for a community pantry. Keep this, he said. I'll be in touch with the shelter director. Kayla tried to speak, but her voice cracked. She nodded instead. As they walked away, Amira looked back and waved with one hand still holding the second sandwich. It wasn't a picture-perfect wave. It was shaky, small, but Patrick would remember it for the rest of his life. That night, the event headline on most local news stations wasn't about a donation or a photo op. It was about a quarterback who stopped everything when one little girl whispered a sentence the world should never have ignored. And for Patrick, it wasn't over. Not even close. The next morning, Patrick Mahomes sat in his kitchen, staring at his phone without really seeing the screen. The coffee on the counter had gone cold. The events of the previous day played in his mind like a loop he couldn't turn off. The girl's voice, her eyes, the way she clutched the sandwich like. It was the only thing that mattered in the world. He had been to charity events before. Hundreds, probably. He had written checks, hosted auctions, posed for smiles, but none of it had felt like that. None of it had shaken him like hearing a child say she hadn't eaten all day, and it wasn't just about her. He grabbed his keys and left without telling anyone where he was going. No cameras followed him this time, no PR manager. Just a hoodie, sunglasses, and a purpose. By the time he reached the shelter off Troost Avenue, the morning line had already begun to form. Parents with tired faces, children clutching their backpacks, volunteers moving quickly, trying to stretch what little they had. Inside, the receptionist recognized him instantly, her eyes widening. Patrick. He nodded. I'm not here to make a speech. I just need to talk to the director. It's about Amira and her mom, Kayla. Minutes later, he was sitting in a small office, papers stacked high on every corner of the desk. Miss Darlene, the shelter's longtime director, wore no-nonsense glasses and spoke with a tone that had seen too much heartbreak to waste time with flattery. She's a good mother, Darlene said, folding her hands. Kayla, proud, hard-working, she's been through hell since her husband left. 2 part-time jobs, both gone in the last month. Amira's school flagged her for missing lunch twice this week. Patrick exhaled sharply. I want to help, he said. Not with a tweet or a donation, I mean really help. Darlene studied him. Do you even know how many kids go to bed hungry in this city? No, he admitted. But I know that's not a reason to ignore the one I met. There was a long pause. Then, slowly, Darlene stood and walked to a filing cabinet. She pulled out a binder, thick with tabs and handwritten notes. These are families on our emergency list, she said, placing it in front of him. Single parents, laid-off workers, people falling through cracks. The list's gotten longer every week. Patrick opened the binder. Names, addresses, notes like diabetic child, no fridge, pregnant, 4 months, sleeping in a car. His jaw clenched. No headlines covered this. He closed the binder. I want to start a direct action fund, he said. No red tape. I put up the money, and you put it in the hands of people who actually need it. Fast. Darlene looked. Surprised? You sure you want to open that door? Once people find out, I'm not announcing anything, he interrupted. Not yet. This isn't about optics. Her face softened. Most of the time, celebrities come through here. They mean well, but they move on. I don't want to move on. That afternoon, Patrick returned to his house, but he didn't go inside. He sat on the tailgate of his truck, flipping through his phone until he found Amira's picture. Someone had taken it without him noticing. Her holding the sandwich. Half smile, sunlight in her eyes. It wasn't staged, it was real. He opened a blank message and typed, You don't know me, but I met your daughter yesterday. I'd like to talk about helping your family, and maybe others too. No pressure, just honesty. He paused, then deleted the message. Too formal, too distant. He tried again. Kayla, if you're okay with it, I'd like to help. Not just for today. Long term. Let's talk. He hit send. The reply came later that night. I don't want pity, but I do want a future for her. So yes, let's talk. That single message shifted something inside him. This wasn't going to be a one-time gesture. It wasn't going to be a story that faded by next week. Patrick felt it in his bones. This was the start of something much larger than football. Sponsorships or spotlight. It wasn't just about a mirror anymore. It was about waking up to what had been there all along, right outside the stadium walls, and realizing it was time to do more than just play the game. The following week, Mahomes sat alone at the back of a community center gym in East Kansas City, surrounded by rows of metal chairs and faded banners from events long past. There was no camera crew, no stylists, no team-branded hoodie, just Patrick, a legal pad, and 2 hours carved out of his schedule for something no agent had arranged. Families began to arrive slowly. Mothers with tired eyes, fathers trying to look composed, grandparents holding the hands of little ones. Some recognized him immediately, others looked confused. Why was he here? Where was the news coverage? He stood up, approached the small stage at the front of the room, and waited until most had taken their seats. Then, without a microphone or prepared remarks, he spoke. I'm not here to promise anything I can't follow through on, he began. I'm not a politician. I'm not here on behalf of any organization. I'm just a guy who met a little girl named Amira last week. The room stilled. A few heads nodded. She told me she hadn't eaten all day, and I believed her. That moment changed me. It made me realize how much I don't see, how much we all don't see. He paused, scanning the faces in front of him. No flashbulbs, no applause, just human beings, each carrying a story far heavier than what could be seen. I don't want to talk at you, he said. I want to hear from you. It was silent at first. Then a woman near the back raised her hand. My son has asthma, she said. We can't afford the medication this month. The clinic cut hours. I work night shifts. I'm trying, but it's never enough. Another voice followed, a man with calloused hands and a low voice. They fired me after I missed 3 days. My wife had surgery. I had to take care of her. I asked for 1 more week. They said no. A teenager, maybe. 17, stood up without waiting to be called. I go to school hungry most mornings. I try to focus, but it's hard when your stomach's screaming louder than the teacher. The stories kept coming, one by one. No dramatics. Just truth, raw and quiet and overwhelming. Patrick wrote everything down. After 2 hours, he closed the notebook and looked at them. They don't need another speech, he whispered to himself. They need someone to listen. That night, he met with Kayla and Amira again, this time not in a parking lot. They sat together at a diner, a corner booth by the window. Amira smiled more. She'd gained a little color back in her cheeks. Her braids were neater. Her laugh came easier. I don't know what you said to Miss Darlene, Kayla said, sipping her coffee, but we got transferred to a transitional apartment today. Real kitchen, real beds. Patrick smiled. You did that, not me. Kayla shook her head. You made people pay attention. That's not nothing. Amira slid a crayon drawing across the table. It was stick figures, one tall with a football, one small with a big smile, and a heart in between. That's you and me, she said. Proudly. He swallowed hard. It's perfect. Later that night at home, Patrick opened his notebook again. He flipped past the stories, the asthma, the job loss, the hunger, and stopped at a blank page. At the top, he wrote 1 sentence. What would it take to feed every child in this city every day? He didn't have the answer yet, but for the first time, he had the right question. He picked up the phone and called his foundation team. No more one-time events. I want a full-scale program. We partner with shelters, schools, local orgs, quietly, effectively. I'll fund the first phase myself. A pause. We'll call it Amira's table. The team was stunned, but they listened. This wasn't a side project. This was the beginning of a movement, and Patrick Mahomes, quarterback of the Kansas City Chiefs, had just decided that his most important passes weren't on the field. They were to the people no one had been throwing to. 2 weeks after Amira's table quietly launched, Patrick returned to the community center. This time, he wasn't walking in alone. At his side was Kayla, dressed with more confidence, posture upright, and Amira, wearing a new backpack with tiny stars on the straps. Inside, rows of folding tables were now covered with boxes of food, fresh produce, cartons of milk, rice, cereal, basic hygiene products. Volunteers, mostly local, had been working non-stop for hours. There were no photographers. That was the rule. No one here would be turned into a spectacle. They were guests, not stories. Miss Darlene approached, him with a clipboard. We've served over 200 families this week. We already have 3 schools asking to partner with us. We need a logistics lead and funding. We're burning through the supplies fast. Patrick didn't flinch. Tell me what you need, we'll get it. He meant it. Every cent of the program had come from his own pocket so far. No sponsors, no tax write-off gimmicks. Just one man deciding that a little girl's empty stomach was not something he could walk away from. Later that day, as the last few families trickled in, Amira sat quietly in the corner, drawing again. This time, she was sketching a table with lots of plates. Everyone around it was smiling. Patrick sat beside her. "What are they eating?" she shrugged. "Everything," he smiled. "That's a good answer." Then her expression changed. She looked down at her shoes and whispered, "If I hadn't said anything that day, would anyone have noticed me?" The question stopped him cold. He looked at her, heart sinking. "You shouldn't have needed to say anything," he said gently. "It shouldn't take courage just to be fed, but I'm really glad you did." Amira didn't reply, but she leaned against him, her small shoulder pressing into his arm. It was the kind of gesture that didn't ask for anything, just offered silent trust. That night, Patrick finally agreed to an interview. Just one. Not with a major network. With a small local reporter named Brian, who had covered high school. Sports long before Mahomes was drafted. They met at a quiet diner. No lights, no makeup, just a voice recorder on the table and 2 mugs of black coffee. "Why now?" Brian asked. "Why this cause?" Patrick looked out the window, then back at him. "Because I got tired of hearing kids say they're hungry. Because I met a little girl who made me realize how blind I've been. Because I have power, and not using it would be worse than never having it." The next day, the story ran with a simple headline, "Mahomes funds Amira's table to feed Kansas City families. This is personal now." No dramatic quote, no promotional link, just facts, just people. And slowly, others began to call. Not corporations, but regular citizens, teachers, retirees, local chefs. "How can we help?" they asked. "How do we keep this going?" Patrick's team had to scramble to set up systems, donations, partnerships, distribution. The quiet effort was growing faster than expected. And yet, despite the attention, Patrick kept returning to the same question Amira had asked. Would anyone have noticed me? That became the heart of everything, every decision, every new phase, every expansion. It wasn't about charity. It was about dignity, visibility, listening when no one else had. The program expanded into 3 more shelters and 2 school districts within a month. But on one late afternoon, while reviewing reports in his kitchen, Patrick received a letter. Handwritten, no return address, just a folded note inside. It read, "I used to think we were invisible, but now when my son eats dinner, he says your name like it's a magic word. Thank you for seeing us." There were no signatures, No request, just gratitude, offered in ink. He held the note for a long time before sliding it into the back pocket of his notebook, the one where Amira's name was written on the first page. He didn't say anything out loud, but he knew the real game had just begun. And this time, he wasn't playing to win. He was playing so no one would be left out of the team. The ceremony was supposed to be small. That was Patrick's only request. No media blitz, no spotlights, no banners with his name. Just a gathering at Amira's school, a modest public elementary nestled between two busy roads in East Kansas City. But by the time he arrived, word had spread, not through newspapers or social media, but through voices, one mother telling another, a school nurse calling a neighbor, a teacher whispering to her class. It wasn't a spectacle. It was a community quietly showing up. Patrick stepped into the cafeteria and stopped. Hundreds of families were seated around long folding tables, children laughing over fruit cups and sandwiches. Banners made of construction paper stretched across the walls. Amira's table, you belong here. Kayla stood near the back, her hands pressed to her mouth. She hadn't known they would name the cafeteria after her daughter. Amira, standing beside her, wore a pink dress and looked confused at first. Then she saw the plaque, a wooden sign bolted near the kitchen window. It read, "In honor of Amira. Lewis, for reminding us that no one should ever have to ask to be fed." The little girl blinked up at her mother. "That's my name." Kayla nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Yes, baby, that's your name." Patrick took no stage. He simply walked up to Amira, knelt down and offered her a fist bump. "You okay with all this?" Amira grinned. "I like the food here." "Now," he laughed, "that's what matters." The principal tapped a glass and asked for everyone's attention. She spoke briefly, not about football or fame, but about listening, about seeing, about how one child's voice had done what no campaign ever could. Then the mic was handed to Kayla. She hesitated. Speaking in front of a room full of strangers wasn't her comfort zone, but she looked down at her daughter, then around the cafeteria, and something in her steadied. "I used to tell Amira to be quiet in public," she began. "Not because I didn't want her to speak, but because I didn't think anyone would listen." A hush fell over the crowd. That day, when she told Mr. Mahomes she hadn't eaten, she broke a rule I had put in her, and thank God she did. She looked at Patrick. "You could have nodded and moved on. But you didn't. You didn't just feed my daughter. You gave her dignity. You gave all of us dignity." Applause rose. Not thunderous, not forced, just steady, like a heartbeat finally heard. After the event, as the crowd dispersed, Patrick stayed behind to help fold chairs and wipe down tables. One of the janitors tried to stop him. "Man, you don't gotta do that." Patrick smiled. "I know, but I want to." Before leaving, he slipped into the kitchen and taped a note inside the pantry door, where only staff would see it. "If we run low, call me, always." He signed it, only with a number. Outside, the sun was setting behind the school, the kind of moment directors might call symbolic, but Patrick didn't think like that anymore. Life wasn't a highlight reel. It was a series of small, hard choices, and the decision to look someone in the eye when they say, "I'm hungry," and do something that actually matters. Back home, he opened the notebook again. The same one filled with stories from shelters, lists from school staff, handwritten notes from families. On the last page he wrote, "She was just a kid, but she started something none of us could." Then he closed it, placed it on the shelf, and picked up a new one. Blank, waiting, because there were more stories to hear, more tables to build, and as long as someone out there still felt invisible, he wasn't done yet.